Welcome everyone to If I Were the Committee, starring yours truly, Darius Brockett. Again, every week we run down and we react to the college football playoff rankings. And do they get it right? Do they don't? Are they geniuses or are they idiots? And who's in, who's out, and who has the best chance? And pretty much all I do is with some friends of mine is we take the opportunity to play the committee game because we are just as, if not somewhat smarter than the committee, I would say. So today's episode, I have another special guest, a friend of the show, friend of my workspace. She does Full Ride on Sirius XM channel 84. She has so many other things that she does. Let's give a round of applause for Miss Allie Gehring. Thank you for joining the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. You're so passionate about football at every level. I really always appreciate our conversations in between shows at SiriusXM and target whether it's high school football, college football, the NFL, as we both lean towards the Washington Commanders. And things can get heated but fun when we break down our opinions on certain things.
Definitely. And this is why I wanted you, especially for this week, because for those who don't know, I'll run that down for you guys. Let's give you guys a list. So the college football playoff rankings dropped last night. If you were living under a rock, everything seems to be normal. But wait a second, chaos happened last week. SEC has some, let's call them mess ups or some oopsies. So at one is Oregon, two Ohio State, three Texas, four Penn State, five Notre Dame, six Miami, seven Georgia, eight Tennessee, nine SMU, newcomer, 10, we have Indiana, 11, Boise, 12, we have Clemson. And for the sake of who's in, who's out, we have Alabama 13, Ole Miss 14. And let's give a round of applause to the backhand of it with Ole Miss and South Carolina. Hearing those initial rankings, when we finally got to see it, first initial thoughts.
Well, so I'm going to take you a little even further down into the rankings, okay? Because this is what I learned last night. I actually watched the rankings show on ESPN. I don't always, but I was tuned in for it, and Heather Dinich was doing her breakdown up at the board of the rankings, right? And I think we all just assumed that with the conference champions getting in, that it was going to be the Power Four conferences and one group of five champion, right?
Yeah,
But
we all assumed it.
as you said, chaos happened, and not just in the SEC, in the Big 12. So we've got Arizona State at 16. Technically, they're assuming right now that that's the Big 12 champion. That's the first Big 12 school we see in these rankings. But Tulane is sneakily sitting there at number 17.
Mm-hmm.
Big thought going into the weekend with how chaotic there are a million. We could spend the entire time of your podcast breaking down the tiebreaker scenarios in the Big 12. It's nuts. 9 teams are still alive. So, my conspiracy theory, it shouldn't even be a conspiracy because a lot of people have said it, I guess, now, but could we have two group of five teams make the playoff and no team from the Big 12?
See, I have an answer to that. And as the sake of Cinderella stories and the sake of all that we love in college athletics, I want to say yes. But I say that because there's a chance Arizona State loses this week, goes into the conference championship game. Win, lose, doesn't matter. It doesn't look good. And Tulane just walks the world of everybody, and we could see them in. So I would like to say yes. In reality, probably not. I think that's probably the more hurtful part is that we have to play the reality game. But it is very interesting that you brought that up, and I want to stay there because the Big 12 has so many people still alive, but also dead. Can we talk about how the fact that Iowa State, BYU, Colorado, and somehow Kansas State are still alive in all that, and what Kenny Dillingham has done with Arizona State, of a school that we were like, who cares, rebuild, doesn't matter. You now control your own destiny. So let's dive straight to the Big 12. Is Arizona State in? Like, can we confirm that if they take care of business this week, they're good?
No, I think they got to win the Big 12 championship. I think the Big 12 is going to get one, maybe one team in, and it's going to be the winner of their conference championship game. That's it. I don't think they have at large chances. So if Arizona State messes around and loses to their rival, which could happen, because really all Arizona has going for them right now is playing spoiler to their least.
Pride.
And you know this, Darius. College football fans, we are petty. We're haters. We love when our team is a spoiler. I would be lying to you. I've got my big Maryland thing on my chest. If somehow pulled a rabbit out of a hat and knocked off Penn State, I would forgive Mike Locksley for this entire college football season to this point because it would probably ruin their chance at the college football playoff or at least put it in serious doubt. No, I think Arizona State has to win this week. If they don't win this week, they're at the mercy of these tiebreakers because if they lose, then it's Iowa State and BYU in the title game. They would need Iowa State to lose, so then it would be Arizona State and BYU in the title game. And these tiebreakers, if BYU were to lose, we've got Texas Tech and West Virginia involved here with a path to get Colorado and Iowa State in the game, Colorado and Arizona State. Arizona Iowa State is probably the most likely scenario for the Big 12 title game. And I think whoever gets to that game, they've got to win if they want to get in the playoff.
If you are Brett Yormark, if you are in charge of this Big 12, who do you want in as your champion? Who do you want to crown that to give your whole conference? This is what we represent. This is who we are. Who do you want out of all those teams to be your best representative? Because we know there's someone in the background who's like, please, 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 please.
You know, I would say Colorado. I know Coach Prime has his haters, but if you get Coach Prime, Shador Sanders, Travis Hunter, who's one of the favorites for the Heisman Trophy in the championship game, that's gonna bring the eyeballs. I would say second place probably Arizona State because I love the storyline. The atmosphere in Tempe was crazy, so their fans would obviously get into it if they make the Big 12 championship game and make it to a college football playoff game. I think they'd be a tough out, but you got to say Colorado from a ratings perspective is going to be the most fun and bring in the most eyeballs.
Oh, of course. I know. I think we all know because you got to have something to sell on. And I talked about it last week with Brian Taylor. I was like these money hungry people, they just want the nice names. They don't want good games. I think we forget that like Arizona State has played really really good. I don't know if they can just walk into the SEC and win, but I'm like the way the SEC is played this year, everybody's gettable. And so it's like I'm with you. I would love Colorado, but I think I'm kind of on the Kenny Dillingham fan wagon now. It's just like, go ahead, guys. Go win one. Like
Weren't they picked to finish last in the
they
Big
were
12
picked
this year?
last.
And now they're the projected champion of the league. It's crazy. I'm pretty sure that the teams alive from the Big 12, only Iowa State was picked to have a winning record this year. Like if you go by the Vegas pick 'em projection odds at the beginning of the year.
I
It's
remember it
crazy.
so vividly. It was Iowa State, Oklahoma State, and Utah. And we all kind of were like, Utah with Kyle
Everybody
Whittingham.
assumed Utah with Cam Rising, Kyle Whittingham, they're going to come in their first year and win the league. I heard it all summer. And
And
yet, we
nothing
are.
happened. I want to, and we talk about teams in conference. I want to transition to the little old team that doesn't have a conference that sits at number 5. Are they getting away too easily out of all of this? Like, is this now the time where we're going to demand that you go play in the ACC, like all your other sports except football?
You know, I don't know. The people at Notre Dame seem so married to the idea of being independent. I don't know if anything is going to convince them to join a league right now. I really don't. I mean, they have their own TV money through NBC and all that. What's weird about Notre
How
Dame is
can we
that they
respect them, Al? How
they
can we
clearly
respect
have
them?
the worst loss. They clearly have the worst loss of any of these teams that you look at because they lost to Northern Illinois. But the problem is they did that early. And Coach Neuheisel always says this on Full Ride, so I've had it beaten into my head. I'm pretty sure it was in like the open for our show at some point that late losses impact you way more than early losses. So if you lose in September, everybody forgets about it and the committee can say, "Oh, but look how Notre Dame has grown since they lost to Northern Illinois up till now." I think if they beat USC, they're in the playoffs. If USC, they're only like a 7.5 point favorite Notre Dame is at USC. If USC with their new quarterback, Jaden Mayava, finds a way to win, then that's going to really, really shake up these rankings on Tuesday. You will have a spicy version of this
I'm
show
all
next.
for it. And I would like to let the committee know I did not forget. I saw them lose to the worst team in college football in that moment and still is. I'm not letting it slide. I'm sorry. I could care less. And you mentioned it. They barely got by. And now everyone calls them like the little darling of look how much you've evolved. Look at this team since that loss and the consistency. They beat Florida State, which would have been a good game if Florida State wasn't terrible. They beat Army, they beat Navy, they were ranked. And again, cool. You've heard me say this, I respect it. If you beat a ranked opponent, I will give you credit for that. I don't care what the number was. It could be 1, it could be 25. If you have that ranking next to your name, I will credit that win for a big win. But that loss is super valuable because how that other team has played throughout the rest of the season. NIU, Northern Illinois, has not played anything good since becoming of that win. Like that is what their Super Bowl and their national championship is in the moment and for the rest of the season. So for Notre Dame to get by and don't have to like they play this week and they can I matter of fact, let me ask you this. If they lose to USC, everyone says they're done. Do you think they are done or do you think they're safe? Because they sit at 5, which means like it's almost like a small margin for error.
I think they fall out. I really do. I think they go out of the field and they don't have, like you mentioned, they're independent. They don't have the luxury of a conference championship win to then boost their resume or get them the bid to the
Fair.
bye to the second week of the playoffs. So yeah, I think if they lose to USC, they're out because then they'll be sitting at 10-2. They'll have the loss to Northern Illinois. You're really going to put them ahead of Georgia or Tennessee, especially if you're looking at SEC title game winner Georgia at that point. That could be Georgia's getting healthier. They've clinched a spot in that game already. Assuming they beat Georgia Tech, they beat Texas or Texas A&M. You're going to put Notre Dame ahead of them? I don't see it.
See, I don't fear that they'll put them ahead of Georgia and Tennessee. I fear they put them ahead of Miami or SMU in that final coming game. Because for all intents and purposes, let's say Miami takes care of business. You win this week, you're in the conference championship. You win, you're in. You're pretty much because how the committee has showed us this entire season, even with Miami losing to Georgia Tech, they were still the ACC's conference championship in their eyes, which gives me some thought process of if you lose to SMU, you're still in. But I do think that they would still consider putting Notre Dame ahead of SMU in that spot. I don't know how it will work in seeding, but I do think they'll consider it because they never looked at SMU as a true contender until this ranking drop. And I think that's the scary part.
It is scary. And honestly, brand bias is huge with the committee. I think we all worried for Indiana once they lost to Ohio State. How far will they fall? Because they're not one of the blue blood brands of college football. Luckily, they only fell to 10. So it looks like, should they take care of business against Purdue, they look like they're going to be safely into the field. But yeah, I would definitely be worried if you're SMU and you're not the conference champion about Notre Dame. I could see that happening.
The conference champion matters, but I think what also matters are the runner-ups. Lane Kiffin, obviously, you've talked about it on your show. I've talked about it on my show. Everybody has pretty much heard him say, like, well, playing in the conference championship almost feels like we're penalized. Ward Manuel, finally, 2 weeks straight, we've now heard him talk about the conference championship games will be evaluated. Do you think they'll hold enough weight, winning and losing? Do you think that will kind of like soften the blow for the college football playoff picture when we get to that moment? Because again, we could Miami, SMU, you have Oregon and Ohio State, you have barring a win here because Texas is still the outlier against Texas A&M, but Texas and Georgia. Do you think like that gives it a more easier look ahead once we evaluate once these conference championship games are set, or is it still something that's going to be murky that we won't know until afterwards?
I think it's going to be murky and it's going to be really interesting because I think the fate of the conference championship games are going to rest on how this plays out. Do you really think the SEC, if they get Georgia into the conference title game, and that's the reason that Georgia doesn't make the playoff because they take another loss to Texas or Texas A&M, and then they're out of the field, do you really think that this is going to continue on? I mean, I think I'm with Lane Kiffin on this. The playoff as it's set up now has made the conference title game feel like the basketball conference title games. They're important to the people that aren't confident that they can get a bid without it. Like SMU, it's essential for them to go in and win the ACC title because, like you said, they really weren't given the respect they were due in the rankings until this week. So the committee could easily take a loss and say, "Oh, you're out of here. You're so close. Thanks for playing. Maybe next year. It's your first year of Power Four football. We'll see you in 2025." But in the 2025-26 season, I mean. But Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what plays out for the loser of the conference championship game because you've also got these teams that aren't going to make it are essentially getting a week off. So like while Georgia has to go play in the SEC title game, if Tennessee's a playoff team, they're just hanging out. They're getting healthy. At this time of the year with injuries rampant, how important is it to have that week off, like the essential non-official bye week, rather than okay, let's say Georgia goes and wins the SEC title game, but then or loses it and still gets in the field, but then they have to host the playoff game the very next week.
I think it balances out because of those four guaranteed buys. So, and I do look at it from a sense of Big Ten, ACC, SEC, just those three because obviously we just saw Boise State back to back weeks are now at the fourth spot. Those three, I pretty much feel like it doesn't matter because you win that conference championship. Yeah, you had that extra week, but guess what you get? You get that bye week, so it balances out versus that team who got that one week off. I think it does balance out. I heard a lot of grievances about that, and I think I'm okay with that, just because that thought process is like, well, if Georgia wins, yeah, I played a SEC championship game, but now this is my bye week right here before we go play in the Sugar Bowl or something like that. So I do think it balances out for that small moment. The scary part is this: how many three-loss teams still have a chance? And I think when we look at it, is there a way that South Carolina finds their way in the college football playoff? Like, is that what's going to be the saving grace for the quote unquote SEC dominance? South Carolina getting in?
Yeah, I think if you have a slip up ahead of so like this three-loss clump right here of Alabama at 13, Ole Miss at 14, South Carolina at 15. Let's say we're playing the hypotheticals game, but South Carolina beats Clemson and then you have a mess up by Notre Dame. They lose to USC. I definitely think the committee could look at an Alabama, an Ole Miss, a South Carolina, and find a path for them into the field. The fact that Alabama sits at 13 after only putting up 3 points against Oklahoma over the weekend, they've been such a bipolar team. I was at the Georgia game. They looked amazing. Chris Childers, who hosts Full Ride, we were looking at each other going, Jalen Milrose, the greatest thing since sliced bread. He's amazing. And then you see him play against Oklahoma this weekend. Totally different guy, totally
Do they deserve a
inconsistent.
spot?
Uh, right now, no, but I could see the committee making room for them if there's a screw up ahead of them.
No,
Tennessee
don't do
loses.
it. Don't play
Tennessee
that. Don't
loses
play
to
their game, Allie.
Vanderbilt. What if Tennessee loses to Vanderbilt?
We're
Then what
not going
happens?
to
The
play
people
the
are going to
committee's
move
game.
up.
We're smarter than them. We're smarter than them. We're not going to play their game. We
I'm
value
just saying,
the best
if
teams or the
you
most
want
deserving teams. You have a
if
three
you
losses.
want if you want the three loss teams out, then you are the biggest Texas fan this weekend. You're the biggest Notre Dame fan this weekend. You're rooting for Miami. You want everything to stay the same ahead of them because I'm telling you, one of those teams slips up and look
You know
out.
what I'm banking on? I will call it, and I want this. And I'm a fan of chaos in this moment. I want Texas to lose so I can see Texas A&M versus Georgia. And I think if Georgia loses, that'll make everything way more interesting because Texas A&M automatically gets in. I think
Yep.
that'll be the fun part. We look at this whole board. I want to go to the bracket. The matchups look so good. Do you think there should be a reseeding? So for those who don't know, in the brackets that are set up, we have when they show us on the college football playoff rankings, we have 5 versus 12, 8 versus 9, 6 and 11, 7 and 10, right? What's interesting is that there are SEC versus SEC game, and then there's Big Ten versus Big Ten game. If they continue this path, should we see reseeding once it all shakes out? Like the four teams, you're good. Should we see like a reseeding on how this is done, or should it just stay status quid pro quo on what it looks like?
I think it should stay. I don't see the point in reseeding. I see your point that we've got Tennessee, Georgia, which we saw before. We've got Indiana, Penn State, which is Big 10 on Big 10. But then when you move on through the bracket, it's like if we're going by, let's pretend the week 14 projection is the final bracket, right? Then we see a Tennessee or a Georgia play Oregon. That's not a game we've seen before. We see an Indiana or a Penn State play Miami. That's out of conference. I think you keep it the same. Honestly, for a casual fan, I think this format is a little bit clunky. So if you added a reseeding process, I think you're really going to lose. In March Madness, we get all the casual people that are just here for the college basketball
I will be
tournament.
one of them.
See, I love basketball all year long, so you can't put me in that
It doesn't
group. But
start
there's
till December.
Nope. See, this could be a whole other podcast episode because I think this November in college basketball has been so much fun. Like if you can't get excited about Danny Hurley technical fouls and getting
Okay, I give you that. That was
double
hilarious.
and Maui Invitational in November, it's entertaining. I'm
Okay,
not
I'll give
saying
you
I'm
that.
watching over football. Like if you put Duke Kansas against like a college football playoff game, I'm obviously picking football. But when you put it in the middle of the week, especially, coming right out of the ranking show, I think it's fine that it's there. But I just I had people texting me yesterday still confused about, hey, 1 through 12 that they released in the rankings is not 1 through 12 in the field. So I've finally gotten the hang of it 4 weeks in because I've been locked in. But people that aren't locked into our level are still having trouble with that. I think if you
Yes.
added a process in there, then people are going to get totally confused. I also think I like how this bracket mimics an NCAA tournament bracket because part of the break of an NCAA tournament basketball champion is who you play, right? Because you could be a 2 seed and have a 1 seed knocked out, and then your path gets easier. Conceivably, hopefully, we'll see upsets in the 12-team playoff that could do the same thing.
That is very true. And I actually like I wanted to argue it and I couldn't. You made absolute complete sense. Like this is the bracket that I think for the hardcore people, it makes sense. The reseeding would just make it way more clunky. I think, and I told you this before we even did the show. And for those who don't know, I have the college football video game. Been playing it for. I won't tell you how long I've been playing it because then it'll sound like I have no life. But the fun thing is, I think I figured it out because of playing that video game. Like me playing Road to Glory or Dynasty, taking Kennesaw State, and somehow we're like the sixth best team, but I lost one game. Somehow I was 13, but then I got seated at number 8. And I was like, okay, ranking says 13, but seated 8. So when I playing that video game kind of helped me understand this a little bit more. What conference do you think needs this more? Like in terms of they need their stars to shine because we're finally seeing the ACC get some love. Which conference do you think needs to shine in this week 14 in order for the committee to go, okay, you deserve this extra team? Because if we
I think
look
it's
at it,
definitely the ACC. I think it's definitely the
oh,
ACC because you look at SMU, they didn't get any love in this ranking system. They've been playing well for weeks now, and they were kind of on the outside looking in. And I think if they play really well against Cal, and then they're matched up with Miami in the conference title game, and then SMU and Miami for the ACC title goes down to the wire, final possession, overtime in Charlotte. How are you going to leave that second team out? I would say that's probably the one that needs it the most. And then a lot of these teams, it's like just don't screw up. Like Indiana, Purdue's probably the worst team in the country. Don't screw up. Like you're in if you keep going, but don't putz around and let them have doubt creep in. You already had that happen against Ohio State a little bit, but people forgive it because, it's at the shoe, it's Ohio State, it's understandable.
which
If
is
it happens
crazy.
against Purdue, it's bad. Penn State, I am confused about why people have so much faith in Penn State. I mean, again, I'm not anticipating a Maryland upset because we have had a very, very rough season, but they struggle with
Billy
Bowling
Edwards for four
Green.
tutties. Let's
I
call it Billy Edwards for
serious
tutties, baby.
I manifest it, speak it into existence. I would love it. I was a season ticket holder the first time this year. I've seen all of it up close and personal. Again, I told you this earlier, but Mike Loxley would be forgiven completely for only getting that would be two
Oh,
wins in conference if
100%.
they got the Penn State. Forgiven for life. Extend him forever. Build the statue. I'd
Let's
be here for it. I'm petty.
Oh, I love that. And I want to dive more, but I can't just yet. Who would you rather be? Because we've talked about resumes. Who would you rather be? A team who has to play for a conference championship soon if you win this week in Texas, or a team that took your L, don't have to do anything, just have to watch everything fall into play. All you have to do is win this week and you're fine in Penn State. Who would you rather be going into this week?
Oh, that's a tough question. I think that I would rather play with stakes on the line because I feel like that's a much easier conversation for a coach to be like, all right, hey, if we win this game, we're good versus, having to sit around and see what happens around you. And then you're at the mercy of all sorts of other results. Like things have to go your way and go right.
It's like it's so weird how like the strength of schedule and the strength of record, that conversation has seemed like it kind of died this week. Is it just me or is it like that's what it kind of felt like where now we're like, oh, we're getting to the back end, so now we could just you win, it's you can coast into it where like those first 2 weeks they were like, well, we look at the strength of schedule versus the strength of record versus this. Has that kind of like died down this week?
Here's what you just hit on what drives me absolutely nuts. I mean, nothing against Board Manual. It's whoever's sitting up there and is the mouthpiece for the committee, which is a thankless job because you've got a room full of people and you somehow have to have a coherent answer that covers everybody's however the arguments sound in that room, right? I feel like the committee can focus on whatever criteria they want in order to support their argument. Like that's the only thing about this format that drives me nuts. It's like, well, if you want to talk about strength of schedule, Board Manual can sit in front of you
It's
and
so
say, well,
subjective.
Georgia beat this, this, and this, but then you've also had committee chairmen sit in front of everybody and say we value wins. That's what Boo Corrigan would say last year about a certain team. It's like, oh well, as a committee we value big wins, and then you could also come the next week and you can say, oh well, the eye test. Texas might have lost to Texas A&M, but have you seen them play? Have you seen Quinn Ewers play quarterback? So that's kind of the only thing. I know we went away from the computers because we wanted the subjectivity. We wanted people who know the game to sit in the room and decide who makes the field, but it does drive me a little crazy
They're
where it's
not
like
watching.
you
Let's be
said, week
honest.
1, week 1 strength of schedule super important. We're 4 weeks in and it's like, "Ooh, well, strength of schedule not that important."
Let's be honest. They're not watching. First off, half the people are former coaches, athletic directors of other programs, and their teams aren't even in. And they say they check their hat at the door. We put our biases to the side.
Do
No,
you
you don't.
though?
No,
Do
you don't. Because
you?
if you still work close within that department, you can't say my bias is to the side. And we know you're not watching every game because if we watched every game, I've ran this gambit for the last week and a half. Georgia played one good half of football against Alabama. Since then, Georgia has not been the most complete SEC team. I always argued Texas was, but somehow everyone argues Georgia's better than Texas because they won head to head. But that first half of football gets erased where Texas plays a really good second half of football, and no one acknowledges that great second half of football that made the score closer. I don't understand any of this in terms of like why are they doing this? Because in my eyes, I would have Alabama and Ole Miss a little bit closer than where Georgia's sitting closer to Georgia's neck because Georgia wouldn't be at 7 in my eyes.
I don't know. I feel like you can't throw out head to head. Like it drives me absolutely nuts, even in the parts of the rankings that don't matter, when you have a team ahead of another team that they beat on the field. I watched Georgia play Texas and beat them.
We did. And I watched
So why
Alabama
like that
beat
that drives
Georgia.
me
I
nuts.
watched Ole Miss dog walk the dogs. Like, I wouldn't have Georgia at 7. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying they don't belong in the race. 7, little generous compared to a 9 SMU who lost to a 19 BYU currently. But at the time, BYU was really freaking good. SMU didn't even change quarterbacks yet. And that was still a very close game. I feel like me in my rankings, I would at least clump those 4 teams on that backstretch. It would be Georgia and Tennessee, maybe 9 and 10, with like 11 and 12 being where it is, and then throw in Alabama, Ole Miss. I feel like
So you would have Alabama and Ole Miss ahead of Georgia.
no, no, no. Wouldn't have them ahead, but I would. I feel like I would make that clump just a little bit closer. Having 7, 8, but having 9, 10, 11, and 12 being the divide of that, I'm like, no, I would kind of put all of you together. I would go, hey, 9, 10, 11, 12. Like, you guys deserve to be a little bit closer because of all your head to heads and just how I looked at it. Not saying one's better than the other. I just don't know if I feel like 7 makes Georgia seem a little untouchable to Ole Miss and Alabama right now.
know. I don't know if they're that far ahead because when you think about it, like Georgia's got to play Georgia Tech, when if they hit 9-3, they're going straight
Okay,
down. You know
fair.
what I mean?
That is very fair.
They're going
You
straight
changed all
down.
my
Or
thought
even if
process.
depending on what happens in other games, if Georgia loses the SEC title game to Texas A&M or Texas, I don't think it's a guarantee that they're in the field. I mean, they've got a really good shot at it. And they're, again, like you said, with them at 7, they have a little bit of cushion to fall a bit. I think that kind of stuff is where you're going to hear the strength of schedule argument really ratchet back up. If you're looking at like Indiana versus Georgia for an at-large spot, then you're going to start to get into like, oh, well, who have they beat? When you're talking who have they beat, it's really interesting to look at Texas because I
Texas
cannot
has
figure
nothing.
out where's their quality win. And to
Did you
add
not
insult to
hear? It was
injury for
Vanderbilt.
Tennessee,
It was
but
25
here's the
Vanderbilt.
thing.
Where were you?
But Vanderbilt was 25 and Vanderbilt came back and almost won the game. And then they try to throw in Arkansas as a key win for Texas. But then for Tennessee, Arkansas is a bad loss. So it's like, what the heck are we doing? Like
All
that's a
sarcasm aside, I
contradiction.
100% agree with you. For those who don't recognize my sarcasm, I'm pretty sure they won't. So, for all I'm 100% with you. Like, it does not make sense.
But
Like,
I mean, if Texas beats Texas A&M, there's your quality win, and then I'll stop arguing. I'll get off my soapbox. But they just how as they've been at 3 for weeks, like that feels more like the eye test than anything else.
okay. Before we wind down, final question. Did the committee get it right this week? And if not, what would you change?
Honestly, I didn't have that many glaring issues with the rankings this week. Like I said earlier, I was worried for Indiana after their loss to Ohio State, but having them at 10, 11 feels right. Clemson being right outside looking in at 12 in the rankings, but not in the bracket because of, how the seeding process goes is really interesting. And it really ratchets up the stakes for South Carolina and Clemson this
Ooh.
weekend. But like I said earlier, Tulane being at 17, Arizona State 16, I'm going to be very intently watching both Tulane and Memphis and then the Big 12 tie-breaking contenders this weekend because if Tulane takes care of business against Memphis and then wins the AAC title game, depending on what happens in the Big 12, that could be really interesting to see which of the conference champions hits the lucky number of the 5th highest ranked.
And people said regular season didn't matter.
Don't even
Oh,
get me started because the same people who say, oh, the sanctity of the regular season, have you ever noticed that they tend to be SEC fans that tell you that?
so much.
As if
Oh, yeah.
they
It
own
just means
unofficial,
more.
but they take their own unofficial bye week every every year. Alabama just played Mercer. Nothing says the sanctity of the college football regular season like watching Alabama play Mercer and South Carolina play Wofford and Georgia play UMass.
And just boost your 50 points and say, look how good we are.
Unofficial bye week. That's what that is. It's they don't have an extra bye week, so they give themselves one by playing an inferior opponent. Honestly, it's smart. Where would
So
Clemson be in the
smart.
rank now if they didn't play Georgia to start the year? If
Ooh,
they
that
played
is a great
Cupcake,
question. That
they played a cupcake school. They didn't start off the season with Georgia. Where are they in the rankings right now? They could be a one-loss team.
that
Scroll up. They
is
could be SMU. They could be Indiana. They could
ooh.
be Tennessee. They could be up there. So Dabo Sweeney's got to be sitting there going, I'm being punished for scheduling real games right now.
I really want to answer that and where they could be, but I know we don't have time because we have basketball to get to. For those who don't know, we're both
Yeah,
going
we
to
do.
basketball game, the same
Beat
basketball game.
Bucknell. Hashtag beat Bucknell.
So before I let you get out of here, I'm gonna give you the floor. Shout out your Twitters, your Instagram, whatever handle you like to be followed on, and I will make sure everyone know where to go find you. You have the floor in 3, 2, 1, go.
I am at a Gehring 91 on both Twitter and Instagram. Be warned before you follow me. There's a lot of I'm a single mom, so there's a lot of daughter content and there's a lot of Maryland content because I am a psychotic Maryland fan, as you can see by my shirt and the fact that I'm going to a Maryland Bucknell basketball game in November. But yeah, and then you can also obviously find me on Full Ride, College Sports Radio on Sirius XM, Channel 84. Childers, Coach Newheisel, Riley's my AP, Riley Johnson, 9 a.m. to noon Eastern every weekday. It's free listening time, so you really have no excuse not to come check us out because it's free right now. You don't even have to pay for it for the next week or so.
At the buzzer. That was perfect. I can't I can't say thank you enough for joining the show. For those who are watching, I don't know what I'm gonna do next week. Uh, because by then we'll know what's going on and what's not, or we'll just be dumb again like we are every week. I lied. We're smarter than the committee, right? Right? We're pretty
So
much
much
smart.
smarter. So
Okay.
much. Me, Ward Manuel, who would you really pick, honestly?
I think I would
Well,
pick you. It seems again, you came in exactly how I looked at it. I value wins and I value losses. I don't care about your strength of record, but apparently that's something we care about until we get to this week. But
next week it'll be something new, Darius. That's the magic of the
and
college
that's the
football playoff committee.
problem. Uh, we don't have time. We're gonna woosah.
Table it. We're tabling it.
Everyone, I would like to thank you for joining another edition of If I Were the Committee. Again, don't know what I'm gonna do next week, but I will be here. Maybe same time, maybe same place. I don't know. Might do it outside if the weather's nice. Until then, I will see you guys at the next weekend's part of the video.